Sir, that piano's for real musicians. The old man didn't flinch. He just sat down and played. Within seconds, the entire train station fell silent. No one knew the man was a billionaire, or that the lullaby he played was unfinished. Until now. This story will break you, lift you, and stay with you long after the last note. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day, and drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. Sir, this piano is for real musicians, the violinist barked, tilting his chin with theatrical disdain. He was lean, middle-aged, and wore a scarf too large for his frame. His violin case sat open nearby with a few crumpled dollars inside. He'd played in this corner of Grand Central Station for over a decade, his stage, his territory, his turf. So when the old man in the weather-worn hoodie slowly approached the upright piano tucked beside track 23, heads turned not out of interest, but amusement. The old man didn't respond to the insult. He just stared at the piano like it was an altar in a cathedral. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and ran his fingers along the dusty, yellowing keys. A few of the keys were chipped. One was missing altogether. The violinist snorted. "It doesn't even work right. It's just for show." The man didn't move, didn't look at him. His silence was unnerving. A security guard nearby began to stir. Tall, thick-necked, and bored, the guard had seen it all. Dancers, magicians, loud kids, a guy who once brought an actual goat through the station. But this, an old man about to slap the ghost of a melody out of a broken public piano that he couldn't let slide. "Hey, sir," the guard said as he strolled over. "Let's not touch the piano today, okay? We got a film crew coming through here in 20 minutes and I don't need a crowd forming." The old man finally turned to look at him. His eyes were not tired. They were quiet. There was a difference. They had the silence of someone who'd once held the world in his hand and then let it fall. He nodded slowly, then turned back to the piano. "Just one song," he said. His voice cracked like dry wood. The guard paused. Something about the man's tone stopped him from finishing his usual lecture. He folded his arms but didn't interrupt. The old man eased onto the bench. It creaked under his weight. The station was never silent, not in the traditional sense. There were always announcements, the hiss of brakes, the click of shoes on marble. But when he lifted the piano cover, even the train seemed to pause, as though curious what might happen next. No one knew him, and that was the point. He was once Nathaniel Royce, the titan behind Royce. Records, a billion-dollar empire that revived classical music in the streaming era. His fingers had once conducted orchestras, launched careers, composed symphonies that played in Paris, Milan, Tokyo. But that was before everything. Before he lost her. After that day, he sold his shares, closed his penthouse, and disappeared from the world with only a small trust left for his daughter. The press called it a spiritual retreat. The board called it insanity. But Nathaniel called it survival. He had walked into the station not for the music, but for her memory. And this piano, this broken, half-forgotten piano, tucked beside travelers rushing to their destinations, it was the only place left where he could reach her. He placed his hands above the keys, hovering, not playing yet, just listening. "Go ahead, maestro," the violinist scoffed, throwing in a sarcastic bow. "Show us your masterpiece." Nathaniel pressed a single note. It was dead, silent. He shifted slightly, found a different key, a cracked high C. It sang, barely. He smiled softly. Then, like a whisper slipping through fog, he began to play. The melody didn't rush. It tiptoed out, delicate, unsure, trembling like a bird testing a branch. A few heads turned. Not many, just enough. Enough to begin that invisible thread that connects soul to soul through sound. The left hand stumbled at first. Age had not been kind to his joints, but the right hand remembered. It remembered her. The song was not famous. It had never been recorded. She had written it on a scrap of paper one rainy night barefoot dancing in their kitchen. It was a lullaby unfinished. She meant to write more. But that morning she collapsed. A rare condition. Silent. Sudden. By the time he brought the hospital piano to life for her in the recovery room, she was already slipping away. And now, here in the station where she first said "I love you" as his concert ended 2 decades ago, Nathaniel played the only thing he had left of her. A girl in leggings and earbuds paused. She didn't know why. She just stopped. A mother rushing her twin boys slowed as she passed. The violinist stopped tuning. Nathaniel's eyes were closed not in performance, but in prayer. Every note, every breath between notes was deliberate, like speaking a language only she could still understand. The crowd didn't gather like an audience. It grew like dawn does, quiet and inevitable. By the 3rd minute, there were 50 people loosely circled, unsure whether they were intruding on something too private, too sacred to witness. A man in a gray suit lowered his phone. A woman with tired eyes stopped crying. Even the guard didn't move. He just stood with his hands on his belt, shifting awkwardly, eyes fixed on the pianist like he couldn't remember what he was supposed to be guarding against. Then came the part of the song with no written notes. It was the part he'd never played in public, the part where his own grief took over. The right hand repeated the lullaby's refrain. The left hand began to fracture. Minor chords, unexpected pauses, broken rhythms. Some would say it was a mistake, but it wasn't. It was mourning. There was no applause, just tears. Even the violinist had gone still. As the final note floated upward into the station's vaulted ceiling, Nathaniel lowered his hands gently to his lap. He didn't bow, didn't stand, just stared at the cracked keys with something between exhaustion and peace. The crowd said nothing for a long moment. Then a small child clapped. It was a light, uncertain sound, one of innocence, not custom. Others followed. Soon a wave of applause rippled through the terminal, not thunderous but reverent. Some clapped with tears on their cheeks, some with hands still pressed to their hearts. Nathaniel stood slowly, his body sore but spirit light. He gave no name, no introduction. He didn't even make eye contact. He simply looked once more at the piano, gently touched the corner of the bench as if blessing it, and turned to leave. The violinist took a step forward. His mouth opened, then closed. Instead, he watched him disappear into the station's crowd, an old man in a hoodie who had walked in as a stranger and left with something far more powerful than recognition. Silence fell again, but this time it was full. The cold air from the subway grates whispered behind him as Nathaniel walked away, swallowed by the river of strangers moving toward nowhere in particular. The scent of roasted peanuts, old metal, and winter breath lingered as voices returned to the station, not quite as loud as before. Not yet. He didn't look back. No one chased after him. No one asked his name. That was the beauty of Grand Central. It was one of the last places in the city where you could disappear in plain sight. Nathaniel stepped into the south tunnel, the light growing dimmer as he descended. Around him, advertisements glared for luxury watches and streaming services. The irony twisted in his chest. He'd once owned half the companies behind those names. He could buy this tunnel if he wanted. Probably still could. But money no longer answered the ache inside him. It never had. He moved slowly, his left knee stiff from years of neglect, and paused briefly when the ache bit deeper than usual. No one offered help, just as he preferred. If they had, if someone had looked twice, they might have noticed the leather wallet in his back pocket, worn to threads, but still stitched with gold leaf initials NR. They might have Googled it, might have remembered the headlines, but the world had long since turned its gaze elsewhere. At the next platform, he found an empty bench beneath the peeling poster of a Caribbean cruise he once invested in, long before everything collapsed. He sat and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his ribs for years. He wasn't crying. not outwardly. But the silence around his eyes, the stillness in his jaw told a different story. He had come back today for one reason only: Lily. Her name rang through him like that final echo on the piano, soft, pure, and painful. She'd been gone for 5 years. No 5 years and 11 days. Not that he was counting. And today would have been her birthday. He used to buy her tulips each year. Orange ones her favorite, even though she was allergic and would sneeze all day just to keep them near. He'd play her lullaby while she pretended not to cry. But now the flowers had no vase. The piano had no home. He remembered her voice that night in the hospital. "Promise me one thing, Nat," she had whispered so faint he had to lean close to catch the words. "Don't let music die in you." He had nodded, choking back grief, then promptly broke that promise for half a decade. Until today. A sudden movement at the far end of the platform caught his eye. A teenage girl sprinted down the steps, violin case bouncing against her back. She was all elbows and energy, the type of kid who looked like she belonged on a rooftop shouting poems at the sky. She reached the tracks just as a train whooshed past, missing her by inches. Nathaniel watched as she paced in frustration, mumbling to herself. She had missed it. Whatever it was. She sat heavily on the bench opposite him and looked up as if sensing his gaze. "Don't judge me," she said sharply, brushing her curls behind her ear. He held up a hand in surrender. "Wouldn't dream of it." She squinted. "You're not from around here. Is that so? You've got that quiet thing, like you don't belong, but you're not scared of it." He chuckled lightly. "That's more accurate than you know." She rested the violin across her lap like it was a living thing, her fingers tracing the worn leather of the case. "Missed the stupid audition. Been prepping for weeks. Conservatory tryouts only happen once a year and I blew it." He didn't reply immediately. He just watched her, noting the nervous twitch in her jaw, the shine in her eyes she was too proud to wipe. "There'll be others," he said gently. "Not for people like me," she muttered. "They don't hand out second chances to nobodies with subway passes and thrift store violins." Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You play," she snorted. "Nah, I just carry this thing for fashion." "Fair enough." He waited, let the silence stretch. She glanced at him, then sighed. "Yeah, I play. Started with a cracked rental when I was 8. Taught myself mostly. My mom says I make the house feel bigger when I play. Less empty." He nodded, understanding far more than she realized. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Were you the one playing the piano up there just now, near track 23? Nathaniel blinked, caught off guard. "Yes," he said simply. "Damn," she murmured. "That was you." He offered the faintest smile. "I'm surprised anyone noticed." She scoffed. "Noticed half the station went dead silent. Some lady dropped her phone and didn't even pick it up. I think I forgot to breathe." He looked away. "I just needed to remember her." The girl didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Some things carried their own weight in the air like incense. She unlatched her violin case. "Would you... could I play something for you?" His eyebrows lifted. "I just need to play something right now. Or I might explode." He gestured toward the open space beside them. "Please." She stood, drew the violin to her chin, and closed her eyes. For a moment she was still a statue, breathing softly. Then she began. The melody wasn't perfect. Her E string was slightly sharp. Her bow shook on the double stops. But it moved. It breathed. She wasn't playing notes. She was telling a story with every swipe of horsehair on string. Anger, joy, defiance, sorrow, they spilled from her in waves, wordless and wild. And Nathaniel felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. When she finished, she stood awkwardly, eyes darting for approval. He clapped softly. "That was honest," he said. She smiled. "Thanks. Honest is all I've got." He reached into his coat and pulled out a card-plain, cream-colored no logo. On the back, he scribbled an address. "Come here tomorrow, noon. Tell them you're expected." She looked at the card, confused. "What is this?" "Just a place with good acoustics," he said, rising with effort. "Wait, what's your name?" He hesitated. Then, "Nathaniel." She nodded. "I'm Amelia." They shared a brief, unspoken understanding, something deeper than names. And then, as quietly as he had entered the station, Nathaniel Royce turned and disappeared once again, this time leaving not just a memory behind, but a spark. Something had shifted, and it would not go unnoticed. The next morning arrived cloaked in a soft drizzle that painted the sidewalks silver and made the city look like it was still deciding whether to wake up or fall back asleep. Amelia stood under the stone arch of the address written on the card, soaked in nerves and raindrops. She checked the time again. 11:59. The building loomed above her, old, elegant, and quiet in that intimidating way rich places tend to be. The sign on the brass door simply read, "Royce Hall for the Arts." She had walked past it 100 times before and never imagined she'd enter it, let alone be expected. She reached for the doorbell, her hand shaking slightly when the door clicked open from the inside. A man in a charcoal vest and tie stepped forward. "Miss Amelia?" She nodded, surprised. "Follow me." No questions, no hesitation. Just that strange, precise calm people have when everything is already arranged. Inside the hall was dimly lit, the floors polished to mirror-like perfection. Paintings lined the walls, originals she guessed, though she couldn't name a single one. The air smelled like old wood lemon oil and memory. They passed 2 other rooms, one with cellos asleep in velvet beds, another where a quartet rehearsed softly behind thick glass. He opened a tall door and gestured her in. Amelia stepped into a room that stole her breath. It was a performance chamber, small, round, and utterly perfect. The ceiling rose like a dome carved with stars and spirals. At its center stood a grand piano, black as obsidian, its lid lifted like a wing. And beside it stood Nathaniel. No hoodie today, just a dark wool suit that somehow made him look even older, yet no less gentle. He smiled. "Welcome." She cleared her throat. This is insane." He didn't answer immediately. He let her take it in. When she finally turned to him, he said, "This was built for a single-purpose sound. It lets truth ring out without interruption." She touched the edge of the piano like it was sacred. "And I get to play here. I'd like to hear you again, without the train tracks rumbling beneath your feet." Her breath caught. She swallowed her self-doubt. "Okay." She placed her violin case down, opened it with reverence, and began tuning. This time the strings came into pitch easily, like they knew they were finally home. Nathaniel took a seat in the corner, folding his hands. She lifted her bow, nodded once, and began. She played the same melody from yesterday, but this time it was cleaner, clearer, and more controlled. Still full of fire, but shaped, sculpted. Her whole body moved with the music, knees flexing, toes curling in her sneakers. It was less a performance, more a confession. When she finished, she lowered the violin slowly and waited. Nathaniel stood and walked to the piano. "What key was that in?" he asked softly. "D minor." He nodded. "May I?" She blinked. "What, play with me?" "Yes." She laughed nervously. You're probably light years ahead of me." "That's not the point." He sat at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and rested his hands gently above the keys. He nodded once, then began to play. A soft cascade of chords unfurled beneath her melody. He didn't overpower. He lifted like wind under a bird's wings. Her violin fluttered, then soared. It was not a duet. It was dialogue, a conversation between grief and possibility, between silence and song. They played for minutes that felt like lifetimes, and when they stopped, neither of them moved. Not out of awkwardness, but awe. He turned to her voice, barely above a whisper. "Do you know what you just did?" She shrugged, wiping her brow. "Played my heart out." "You listened." She blinked. "To what?" "To me. And more importantly, to yourself." She sat on the stage, heart pounding. "Why me?" He walked to a cabinet and returned with a faded notebook. He handed it to her. Inside were music notations, scribbled lyrics, and diary-like lines in looping cursive. "My wife's lullaby," he said. "The one I played yesterday. It was hers. She wrote it before she died. I never finished it. I couldn't." Amelia touched the page like it might dissolve. "It's beautiful." He sat beside her on the stage. "I lost myself after she passed. Not just her, but everything that made me human. I let music fade to a memory. But yesterday when I played, and then when you played, something came back." She looked up at him wide-eyed. "You want me to finish it? I want us to finish it. Together." She stared, overwhelmed. "But I'm just—" "Don't," he said gently. "Don't say just. You are a voice the world hasn't heard yet. And you're exactly the kind of voice she would have loved." Tears welled up before she could stop them. She turned her face away, embarrassed. He didn't comment, just gave her space. Then he said, "There's a recital here next month. Private audience, donors, press. I was planning to cancel it. But I think we should play." Amelia's head whipped around. "We—" He nodded. "But what if I mess up?" He smiled. "That's the point. This piece was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be true." She looked down at the notebook. The melody danced on the page like a ghost waiting to be called home. For the first time in her life, Amelia believed it might be possible, just maybe, that her music could reach further than her apartment walls. She stood slowly. "Then let's do it." Nathaniel extended his hand. She shook it. And just like that, the song began to breathe again. The weeks that followed passed, not like days, but like movements in a symphony. Each rehearsal, a swelling crescendo of growth grief and unexpected joy. Every afternoon, Amelia returned to Royce Hall, her battered violin case bouncing at her side, her steps quicker than she meant them to be. The moment she stepped through those heavy oak doors, the outside world, the bills on the kitchen counter, the gnawing question of whether she'd ever belong anywhere, faded into a hush. And always Nathaniel was already inside. Sometimes he waited at the piano, hands folded. Sometimes he was bent over old sheet music, scribbling in a soft graphite pencil. He never wasted time with small talk. Their language was music now. On the second Tuesday, he gave her a copy of the lullaby's original manuscript. His wife's name, Lily, etched softly in the margins like a secret. "Don't think of it as hers," he told her. "Think of it as unfinished breath, something still waiting to exhale." She had stared at the notes for a long time, fingers hovering over her strings, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a rooftop ready to leap. Nathaniel, for his part, never rushed her. He played slowly with tenderness, as if coaxing the past from the cracks in the room. His hands weren't as nimble as they once were, but what he'd lost in speed he'd gained in soul. He played like a man who had nothing left to prove, only something left to give. Each session ended the same way, not with applause, not even with words. Just silence, charged and full. And every time Amelia walked out into the street afterward, she felt taller. One evening, after a particularly haunting rendition of the second verse, apart, they rewrote together with a new minor key pivot. Nathaniel asked, "Do you know why that last section matters?" She shook her head, catching her breath. "No, but I feel it." "It's the place," she paused, he said softly. "On the original page. It's where she stopped writing. That was the moment we lost the baby. Amelia's heart dropped. He didn't flinch. He just stared at the keys. She miscarried early. No one knew, not even our families. She wrote through her pain and then just stopped. That space, those empty bars, they were her silence. Amelia swallowed hard. Then, what are we doing now? He looked at her, then his eyes wet but unwavering. We're giving her voice back, not to rewrite the pain, but to make room for hope inside it. She blinked fast, nodding. And that night when she played the final chorus, she added a single high harmonic at the end of the phrase, a whisper of light where there used to be nothing. He said nothing afterward, just pressed a hand to his heart. The next morning the first flyer went out. One night only, Royce Hall recital, a revival of lost music. It didn't name the performers, just a quote at the bottom. Some songs are born in silence and only bloom when shared. The city, as it often does, whispered, quietly at first, then louder. There was talk on forums. Classical music blogs speculated about a mystery benefactor. Some claimed Nathaniel Royce was behind it, returned from self-exile. Others dismissed it as myth. But interest grew. Seats began to fill. One afternoon during rehearsal, Amelia glanced up mid-phrase and caught Nathaniel not watching her, but the old photograph taped to the inside of the piano lid. It was worn, curled at the corners. A black and white candid of Lily laughing in sunlight, a tulip tucked behind her ear. Amelia had seen it before, but never up close. She finished the passage and let the last note fade. "She's beautiful," she said softly. Nathaniel didn't look away from the photo. She laughed like wind chimes, and she believed in everything, even when the world didn't. "She would have loved this," Amelia said. "What we're doing. She's the reason for it." He closed the piano gently. "And you," he added. Amelia looked away, embarrassed. "I'm just a kid with a second-hand violin." "No," he said firmly. "You're the echo she never got to hear." The final week before the recital, they rehearsed every evening until the stars rose over the city like spectators. Some nights were electric, the music seamless. Other nights, Amelia broke down from nerves, missed entrances, or slipped out of tune. She cursed herself in whispers, cheeks flushed. Nathaniel never scolded. He simply waited. Once she threw down her bow and stood in the middle of the room shaking. "I can't do this," she snapped, tears in her voice. "I'm going to ruin it, in front of everyone. They'll all be watching and I'll forget everything and I'll let you down, her down, myself down." Nathaniel walked over. He picked up the bow and handed it back to her. "Do you know what the greatest performers have in common?" he asked. She shook her head. "They fall apart, but they don't leave the stage." Amelia wiped her eyes, breathing hard. "Look at me," he said. She did. "I don't care if you miss a note, or tremble, or freeze for a full minute. Just don't walk away. That's what ruins the music. Not fear, but silence that never finds the courage to speak." She nodded, jaw clenched. And when she lifted her violin again, her hands still trembled, but her sound did not. That night, Nathaniel walked home slower than usual. His limbs ached. His breath caught in his chest in ways he didn't share. But in his pocket was a folded program. Just the title. The Lullaby of Lily Royce, for piano, violin, and unfinished stories. He stared at it under the lamplight outside his apartment. And for the first time in 5 years, he allowed himself a single, tearful smile. The recital hall shimmered with anticipation. It was the kind of evening where even the air seemed dressed for the occasion, crisp, delicate, and quietly electric. Royce Hall had never looked more alive. Candles glowed from sconces along the walls, casting soft halos on the stone. The red velvet chairs were nearly filled, and the audience buzzed in low murmurs, a polite orchestra of whispers and shuffling programs. No one on the guest list knew what exactly they were about to witness. There was no press release, no reveal of the performers. Just a single line printed on each folded program, a revival of something that should never have been lost. Some had come because of the rumors that Nathaniel Royce, the vanished mogul, the fallen titan of classical revival, was somehow involved. Others had come because of the intrigue. But the few who had loved music long before it was fashionable, they had come because of a feeling, a pull, like the promise of hearing something sacred for the very first time. Backstage, Amelia stood alone, her hands trembling around her bow. The velvet curtain was only feet away, but it felt like an ocean. She could hear the audience arriving. Every cough, every distant laugh, every program flicking open felt like thunder in her ears. She glanced at her reflection in the long mirror, her curls tamed in a soft braid, her black dress modest but elegant. Her shoes pinched her toes. She looked nothing like the girl who had once missed a subway audition and cried into her violin case. Yet inside, that girl still lived, still panicked, still whispered, "You don't belong here." "Breathe," came a voice from behind her. She turned. Nathaniel stood at the threshold of the dressing room wearing a tailored black suit, the same shade as the concert grand that waited in silence behind the curtain. He looked older than usual tonight. Not tired, but full. Like every line on his face had a purpose. His tie was navy, his cufflinks small tulips made of silver. He walked toward her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do you know what I used to do when I felt like I didn't belong on a stage?" She shook her head. "I pictured the person I was playing for. Just one. Not the whole crowd. Not the critics. Just one soul who needed it." Amelia swallowed hard. "And who are you playing for tonight?" He paused. His voice, when it came, was a breath. "Her." Amelia blinked back tears. "I'll play for her too." He smiled, faint and fragile, and offered his arm. "Shall we?" They stepped together through the wings, standing just behind the curtain. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. A single spotlight fell on the piano. Nathaniel walked first, each step measured. Not theatrical. Intentional. The silence that followed was unlike anything Amelia had felt before. Not performance, silence, but reverent silence. The kind reserved for funerals and miracles. He sat, adjusted the bench, placed his fingers gently on the keys, then looked toward the wings. She stepped out into the light and gasped. Not because of the crowd, not because of the sheer number of eyes watching her, but because sitting in the front row just beneath the piano's arch was her mother. Tears already rimmed her eyes. Her coat was too thin for the season, and her hands clutched her purse like a lifeline. Amelia's knees wobbled. Her throat tightened. Her mother nodded once, a small gesture, but it was everything. She took her place beside Nathaniel and raised her violin. No announcement, no introduction, just a breath. And then the first note. The lullaby began the way it always had, with the soft, aching hush of grief. Nathaniel's hands painted memories in sound. His right hand arched like a swan's neck, curling into minor chords that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then Amelia entered. The room leaned forward. Her violin was not flawless. It was real. She didn't aim to impress. She aimed to reach. Each note was a thread tugging gently at the hidden places inside every listener, places where they'd hidden away pain or wonder or dreams left unfinished. In the fourth measure, the music shifted, the section Lily had never completed, the silence she'd left behind. Nathaniel paused, just a breath. His hands hovered. Then together they filled it. Not with grandeur, not with orchestral flourish, with tenderness. Amelia's bow barely kissed the strings, her harmonic trembling like a secret finally spoken aloud. Nathaniel echoed with chords that rose like morning light through a stained glass window, and the audience wept. Not loudly, not messily, just honestly. The music climbed now into a new section they'd written together, a movement of renewal, of resilience, a melody that said, "We remember, and we continue." Amelia turned slightly and saw him, not Nathaniel the mogul, but Nathaniel the man. His eyes were closed, his fingers gliding across the keys like they were gliding across memory. In that moment it didn't matter who was watching. It didn't matter that she was young, or that her dress was borrowed, or that her hands still trembled before each note. What mattered was this: she belonged here. Because this music, this aching, radiant human music, needed her, and she needed it. As the final note faded, the silence didn't come immediately. It was as if no one dared to move, as if breathing too loudly might shatter something too beautiful to name. Then a single clap, then another, then a wave, not polite applause, not theatrical standing ovation, but a rise, a lifting of every person in the room, people standing not just for the performers, but for what they'd felt, for what they'd remembered, for what they'd healed. Amelia bowed once, deeply. Nathaniel stood beside her, bowed once as well, then turned toward the audience, and for the first time in years, he spoke into a microphone. "My name is Nathaniel Royce," he said. A murmur. "I left music because I believed it died with someone I loved. But tonight, I realized something." He looked at Amelia. "Music never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to play it again." Then he stepped back and let the moment breathe. Backstage, Amelia and Nathaniel sat beside each other in the dark, no longer performers, just two people who had shared something sacred. "You were wrong," she said gently. He looked at her. "About what?" "That silence she left behind. It wasn't unfinished. It was a rest." He smiled and said nothing. Because she was right. The morning after the recital, the city felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just more awake. Like somewhere beneath the sidewalks and stone, something had stirred. In a world too used to rushing past beauty, last night had made people pause. A lullaby had threaded its way through strangers' hearts, and even as the sun rose, the memory of it lingered like a perfume no one could name. Inside Royce Hall, the dust motes swirled gently through golden shafts of morning light. Amelia stood barefoot in the recital room, still in her rehearsal clothes from the night before. She hadn't gone home. After the performance, she had curled up on the velvet seat near the wall and fallen asleep with her violin across her chest. Now she simply stood in the center of the room, breathing it all in. The ghost of last night's final note still hummed in her ears. She turned slowly, taking in the empty chairs, the silent piano, the echo that wasn't really an echo. It was a memory. Alive. Watching. Then a creak from the hallway. She turned alert. It was Nathaniel. His suit jacket was draped over his shoulder and his shirt was slightly unbuttoned at the collar. He looked older today, and softer. Like something long buried had finally been released from him, and he was still learning how to live without its weight. "I thought you'd be home by now," he said, his voice gentle. "I didn't want to leave," she replied. "I kept thinking that if I left, it would all disappear." He smiled faintly and walked in, placing his jacket over the side of the piano bench. "Funny," he said. "That's exactly how I felt the night I met her." Amelia sat down cross-legged on the floor like a child in story time. "Tell me about her." Nathaniel took a deep breath, resting his fingers on the edge of the keys, not playing, just feeling the grain of the ivory. Lily was a storm in soft shoes. She walked into a gallery where I was giving a private concert back, when I was still pretending to be an artist, before the fame, before the money. She stood at the back of the room, didn't applaud, didn't smile, just watched me with this look, like she could hear all the notes I was too afraid to play. She sounds amazing. She was, he said quietly. She was the kind of person who lit candles in every room, even in daylight, just because she liked watching the shadows flicker. He chuckled. I used to write songs and pretend they were for others, but they were always for her, every single one, even the angry ones, especially those. Amelia stood slowly, stepping over to the piano. She heard you last night, she said, voice steady. I know, he whispered. And for the first time in years I played without trying to reach her. I just played. With her. There was a silence between them then, not empty, but full, the kind that wraps around two people when grief gives way to gratitude. Amelia opened her violin case and plucked the bow gently from its velvet nest. I've been thinking, she said, tightening the hair with the smallest twist. The lullaby. It doesn't have to end here. Nathaniel looked up. I mean, what if it's just the first piece? What if we built something from it, something bigger, something that carries more voices, young ones no one's heard yet? You mean a school? Not just a school, she said, her eyes lit with fire now. A sanctuary. For kids like me, like I was. The ones with music in their bones but nowhere to go. No stage, no piano, no safety. Nathaniel stared at her for a long time. Then slowly he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet. He handed it to her. She opened it. At the top, Lily Royce Foundation for Musical Restoration. Below that, a list of proposed names. Hers was the first. Amelia gasped. You already... I started it 5 years ago, he said softly. But I never knew who it was for. I just kept funding the bank account thinking one day I'd know. Now I do. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them. She just said, I'm in. A few hours later, they were seated in the grand lounge of Royce Hall, sifting through old compositions, ideas, letters, Lily's journals, Nathaniel's sketches, Amelia's napkin scribbles. It was a collision of generations, of grief and grit, of future and faith. They didn't stop working until the evening light turned the room to gold, but even then they didn't want to stop. At one point, Nathaniel paused to watch her across the table. Her brow furrowed, her fingers stained with graphite, her lips mouthing notes silently. You know, he said, you remind me of her. Amelia looked up. Not just in how you play, but in how you believe. She blinked, lips parting slightly. She used to say, he continued, that music isn't something you perform, it's something you offer, like a hand. Amelia nodded. I want to keep offering it, she said, to as many people as I can. He smiled. Then we'll make sure they find it. That night, before locking up, Nathaniel returned to the recital room alone. He sat at the piano once more, not to practice, not to mourn, just to thank. He played one single phrase, 3 notes, softly, then whispered into the dark, I kept my promise, Lily. And outside in the windless evening air, the city held its breath. The next morning began not with music, but with noise. A sharp knock echoed through the Royce Hall foyer, then another, rapid, impatient, and deliberate. Nathaniel opened the front door to find a man in an expensive coat and mirrored sunglasses standing tall against the sunlight. He carried the smug expression of someone who wasn't used to being kept waiting. Behind him, a slender woman held a phone already recording. Mr. Royce, the man said, not bothering to smile. I was hoping we could have a moment. Nathaniel stepped forward warily. And you are? Carter Blake, head of acquisitions at Ivory Capital. We fund performance venues, conservatories, private studios. We've been watching your property for years. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. I'm not selling Royce Hall. Blake chuckled. Oh, I think you misunderstand. I'm not here to buy the building. I'm here to make sure you don't waste it." Before Nathaniel could respond, the woman stepped forward and raised her phone higher. "This is being recorded for documentation purposes, Mr. Royce," she said briskly. "We're here to inquire about your operational plans. The IRS and city registrars show zero activity under the Lily Royce Foundation for the past 5 fiscal years." "That's changing," Nathaniel replied coolly. "As of now." Blake took off his glasses. "Look, I admire the sentiment. Really. But let's not turn this into a charity opera for lost dreams. This city doesn't run on memory. It runs on revenue. You have a building with historic value and dormant capital. My firm is offering to lease the property rebranded as a luxury performance venue. You get royalties. They get PR. We even let the name stay." He paused, then added with a grin, "Royce, after all, still means something." Nathaniel's voice was calm. "It meant something long before your name showed up on my doorstep." The woman scribbled something down. Blake tried again. "Why waste this on a few street kids with violins?" Behind him, the front door creaked. Amelia stood there, violin in hand, having heard the last line. She stepped into view, her voice steady. "Because those street kids are the reason this building still breathes." Blake gave her a quick once-over and smirked. "You're the one from the recital right cute story. Very viral. You've got maybe 6 months of buzz before they move on to the next prodigy." Amelia didn't flinch. "We're not building buzz. We're building belonging." Blake turned back to Nathaniel. "You have a week," he said. "After that, city officials may reconsider your nonprofit status. And without it, this place folds." Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "Get off my steps." Blake hesitated, lips curling slightly. "This is a mistake." "Possibly," Nathaniel replied, "but at least it's my mistake." They left without another word. Once the door closed, Amelia turned to him. "Is it true about the foundation?" Nathaniel nodded. "I froze the paperwork after Lily passed. Couldn't bring myself to continue. I thought grief was something you buried, not something you could grow through." Amelia stepped closer. "We still have time, right?" "Barely," he admitted, "but it's not impossible." They got to work. That night, Royce Hall buzzed with more life than it had seen in years. Not concert-goers, but volunteers. Former students Nathaniel had once mentored, a few musicians from the recital, parents of young artists who had heard the lullaby and shown up asking, "How can we help?" The answer was everything. They cleaned, cataloged, filed, and restored. Amelia typed until her fingers went numb. Grant proposals, press statements, donor outreach. Nathaniel called in favors from contacts who owed him nothing, but still remembered his kindness. By midnight, the website was live. By morning, it had gone viral. "The Lullaby That Changed a City" headlined one article. Another read, "A Silent Billionaire, a Teenage Violinist, and the Music That Saved a Forgotten Hall." But none of that mattered as much as the letter that arrived 3 days later. It was written on thin, careful paper in handwriting that shook with age. "Dear Mr. Royce, I was a nurse at Memorial when your wife passed. She once gave me a tulip after I sang to her during a stormy shift. Said my humming made the pain feel distant. I never forgot her kindness. Last night my granddaughter showed me your performance online. She wept. She asked if music can remember people. I told her yes, because yours just did. Thank you for not letting her vanish." Nathaniel folded the letter with reverence. Then quietly he wept, not from sadness but from the kind of full ache that only comes when the past no longer feels like a weight, but a bridge. Over the following days, applications flooded in from young musicians, some trained, some self-taught, many scared. Some couldn't read music. Some brought recordings they made on cracked phones. One boy showed up with no instrument at all, just said, "I hum things when I'm sad." They all had a place. The foundation's official launch was set for the spring, but already the walls echoed again with melody. Not perfection, but honesty. Late one night, Nathaniel and Amelia sat together on the front steps of Royce Hall. The stars above were faint. New York never gave them much room, but tonight one or two broke through. Amelia looked over her voice, low. "Do you ever miss it? The life you had before?" Nathaniel thought for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "because I'm not living after Lily anymore." He turned to her eyes, soft. "I'm living with her, in every note, every name on that student list, every heartbeat of this place." She smiled, and just before heading in, she asked, "Do you think she hears us?" He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Every time we play." Inside, a child tapped timidly on a piano key, and outside the wind carried it upward. It was just before sunrise when Amelia found herself alone in the great hall again. The chairs were still pushed aside from the last evening's makeshift student workshop, and a trail of half-eaten cookies lined the back table, where the younger kids had ended a spirited rehearsal by turning their music stands into imaginary swords. But the mess didn't bother her. If anything, it warmed her. The place no longer felt like a museum. It breathed again, imperfect, alive. She stood at the center of the room in her socks, her violin tucked under her chin, playing quietly to no one in particular. The melody wasn't written down. It was something she'd carried since childhood, hummed under her breath when things got hard. But now she shaped it, teased it into form, filling the high ceiling with a song born from solitude. The morning sun crept slowly over the stained glass windows, painting gold across her shoulders. Her bow, the curve of her instrument. She looked like she was glowing. When she finally stopped, she didn't hear the soft applause right away. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, dressed in the same faded sweater from the first day she met him. His smile was quiet and proud. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said. "That was beautiful." Amelia blushed. "I was just trying something." "You weren't trying," he said, walking in. "You were telling. There's a difference." She rested her violin at her side. "Do you think I'll ever write something that matters? Something that lingers?" He sat on the edge of the stage, his hands folding with care. "You already have. You just don't know who it's saved yet." She walked over, sitting beside him. "I keep thinking about the kids. The ones showing up here. Some of them come just to sit, not even to play. It's like they're waiting to believe they matter." Nathaniel nodded. "They are." He looked around at the peeling columns, the worn piano, the dust they hadn't yet cleaned from the upper balconies. "This place, it's not perfect," he said. "But that's what makes it powerful. Because it welcomes imperfection. It holds it gently." She leaned back on her palms, staring up at the dome above. "Do you remember the boy with no instrument?" she asked. "Jesse, the one who said he just hums?" "Of course." "He came yesterday with his baby sister," she said. "Said he didn't want to leave her home alone anymore. I found them in the practice room. She was asleep in his lap while he sang to her. Softly. Just this pure sound. And I realized that's music, too." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Yes. That's the root of it. Not performance. Connection." A moment passed between them. Soft. Sacred. Then Amelia pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket. "I wrote something," she said shyly. "Not a song, just a few words. I didn't know who else to show." He unfolded it carefully, read in silence. Some songs are born from silence, not because the silence is empty, but because it's full of all the things we were never brave enough to say aloud. Music is how we begin to speak them again. He looked up slowly. "You should share this." "With who?" "With them." He gestured toward the echoing hall. "The kids. The ones still waiting to believe." She shook her head bashfully. "It's just words." Nathaniel placed the paper in his breast pocket. "Sometimes words are the only bridge between a broken heart and a healed one." They sat there for a while, letting the room fill with mourning. Later that day, they prepared for a small community event. Open doors, free lessons and performances by the students. Flyers had gone up across Harlem and the Lower East Side. No dress code, no reservations. Just a welcome. Amelia taught 3 beginner violinists how to hold their bows without squeaking. Nathaniel led a piano circle where students made up harmonies on the spot, laughing each time a dissonant note clashed into a moment of unexpected brilliance. By afternoon, the foyer was packed. Old men in wheelchairs nodded along to the beat. Teenagers with headphones lowered them to listen. Mothers clapped while holding babies on their hips. The music wasn't refined. It was raw, playful, stumbling, triumphant. And somehow that made it more moving than any polished concert could have been. At the end of the day, when the last of the guests had trickled out, Amelia leaned on the railing of the second-floor balcony watching the stage below. Nathaniel was alone, wiping down the piano keys with a cloth moving slowly, almost tenderly. He didn't notice her watching. She smiled. That's when she noticed the man in the back corner. He was older, in his 70s, maybe wearing a military-style cap and holding something close to his chest, a leather-bound journal. He stood so still he almost faded into the architecture. Amelia descended the stairs and approached him carefully. "Hi," she said softly. He looked up, eyes warm beneath age-lined brows. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to see it again." "Again?" she asked gently. He nodded, swallowing. "My wife played here, 63 years ago. Her first recital. She was 14. I was 16. Sat right in that third row over there." He smiled faintly. "She wore red shoes. Said she thought they'd bring her luck." "What did she play?" Amelia asked. "Beethoven," he said. "Moonlight Sonata. She cried the whole second movement. Said it felt like the piano was remembering something she couldn't name." Amelia's chest tightened. "Is she—" "She passed last spring," he said quietly. "But when I saw the article about the revival, about you, I thought maybe this place could remember her too." Amelia reached for his hand without thinking. He pressed the journal into hers. "Her notes," he said. "Songs she never finished. She wrote them for students she never met." She held the journal to her chest. "Then maybe now they'll get to hear them." He smiled. That's all she ever wanted. Nathaniel watched from the shadows of the hallway, heart aching in the most beautiful way. That night, he added the woman's name to the Royce Hall Wall of Honor, etched softly in gold leaf, beneath the words, "For those who played, not for praise, but for peace." In the main room, a student plucked a tentative chord on an old cello. It was slightly out of tune, but it was real, and that mattered more than perfection ever would. Rain clung to the windows of Royce Hall in soft streaks as the city sighed beneath gray skies. It was the kind of afternoon that asked for stillness, the kind where music felt like a necessity, not an art. Inside, a candle flickered on the old upright near the entryway, Amelia's doing. She liked lighting one every morning now, just as Lily once did. Not for ceremony, just for warmth. Nathaniel sat alone in the main recital room, his fingers quietly tracing the edge of a page. The worn journal the elderly man had left days ago now lay open across his lap. The paper had turned a soft gold with time, and the ink trembled in places where emotion had likely guided the pen more than control. There were songs, fragments, scribbled bars of melody. But more than that, there were dedications. To the girl who plays in silence. To the boy whose hum will outlast sirens. To the hands that tremble but never stop. Nathaniel's chest rose slowly as he closed the book, overcome by something both heavy and bright. The past wasn't haunting him anymore. It was inviting him forward. The hall echoed softly with footsteps. Amelia entered with a stack of envelopes. Her curls frizzed from the rain. She was soaked at the edges, but smiling with something fierce in her expression. "You're not going to believe this," she said, catching her breath. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. She held out one envelope, trembling slightly. He opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $2 million. Attached was a handwritten note. My daughter came home humming a song she heard at your hall. She said it made her feel like the world was listening to her for the first time. I never understood music, but I understand my daughter. Keep building. A mother who now believes. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, blinking back the sting in his eyes. She wasn't the only one, Amelia said, laying down envelope after envelope. Some small, some thick, some with hand-drawn stickers, others in formal corporate print. Donations, messages, offers, volunteers. I posted the recital online, she continued. Just a clip. No titles, no credits, just the music. And people started sending themselves back here, like they'd been waiting to be invited all along. Nathaniel looked around the room. We're going to need more chairs, she grinned. And maybe a second building. He laughed, shaking his head. What have we started? A return, she said softly. Later that evening, as twilight fell, the hall filled with more than echoes. Students filed in, new and old. A boy with braces and a ukulele. A girl with a cello twice her size. A young man with hearing aids who played piano by reading vibration charts. And Jesse, the humming boy now, sang softly with a group, his baby sister sitting beside him with a tambourine made from 2 paper plates and a smile that could melt steel. Tonight wasn't a performance. It was an offering. Amelia led the way. She stood at the center, not on the stage, but amid the crowd, holding her violin, not like a trophy, but like a hand she was reaching out with. We started this because someone believed music wasn't dead, she said, because someone once made a promise to someone they loved and kept it. She looked toward Nathaniel, and because silence is not the end, it's the waiting place before courage. The room quieted as she raised her bow. Then she played. Not the lullaby. A new melody. Built on its bones, yes, but reborn. It swelled with light. It trembled with memory. It reached through grief and offered grace. One by one, others joined her. A harmony from the cello, a soft rhythm from a borrowed drum. A boy on the clarinet, unsure but brave. And Nathaniel, seated at the piano, brought it all together, not with flash, but with foundation, like a heart behind the ribcage of it all. People in the audience wept again, but not from sadness, from something harder to describe. The music said what words never could. You are still here. You are still needed. You are still heard. When the final note hovered in the space, soft, reverent, unwilling to fully leave, the room stood in silence, not for applause, but to honor what had just been given. Nathaniel closed the piano lid gently and looked at Amelia. I think, he said, voice tight with emotion, we've written her final verse. Amelia shook her head. No, she whispered. We've just written her beginning. He looked out at the faces in the room, so many, so young, so alive. She was right. Lily's lullaby had become something more. Not just a song, a movement, a home. The first snow came quietly that year. No thunder of wind or warning from the sky. Just a gentle hush that softened rooftops and cloaked the city's sharp edges with grace. It fell outside Royce Hall like a whispered blessing, dusting the stone steps and settling on the window ledges where warm candlelight flickered from inside. Amelia stood by the main doors, her coat barely buttoned, her breath painting clouds in the air as she watched the flakes spiral downward. Her violin case hung from her shoulder. In her hand, a single tulip orange wrapped in thin paper and ribbon. She turned as Nathaniel stepped beside her, adjusting the scarf around his neck. His eyes, though lined with time, were clear and steady. You remembered, he said, nodding at the flower. Every year from now on, she replied softly. I think the hall should be full of tulips every December. He looked out at the city beyond the gates, quiet now, reverent. She would have liked that. Amelia smiled. I think she already does. They walked together through the hall's main corridor, passing framed photos that now lined the walls. Students' mid-rehearsal laughter frozen in motion. Tearful embraces a child asleep with a cello across her lap. And in the center of it all, a new installation, a portrait of Lily Royce. Not posed, not grand, just a candid photo found in an old box. Her laughing with her head tilted to the sky, a piano behind her, sunlight wrapped around her, like music. Beneath the portrait, etched into the brass plaque, was a single line. The song was never about her. It was because of her. Tonight was the hall's first winter recital since the revival, a student showcase called The Music That Found Us. Nathaniel and Amelia had chosen the name together, not because it sounded poetic, but because it was true. Music had found them, both of them, lost in different silences, carrying grief that couldn't speak. And somehow, in one worn piano beside a busy train track, it had begun again. Now, in this glowing, reawakened sanctuary, it would echo forever. The recital room was full. More than full. Every seat taken, people standing at the back, in the aisles, even lining the upper balcony rail. The warmth of so many bodies and so many hearts turned the snowy night outside into something far away, almost unreal. Nathaniel stood near the back, letting others have the spotlight. He watched as a young girl took the stage, gripping a violin nearly as tall as her torso. Her fingers were nervous. Her bow trembled slightly. But when she closed her eyes and pulled the first note from the strings, it rang clear. Not perfect, but honest. And that, Nathaniel thought, was everything. After her, a boy on the spectrum played a duet with his brother. Then came Jesse, the humming boy, who now sang confidently in front of a full room. And there was the cello girl with the red shoes dancing softly in place as she played a tune that had no name but needed none. Each performance was short, simple, unpolished. But together, they formed something transcendent. Then came Amelia. She stepped onto the stage wearing a black dress with silver thread woven into the hem, modest, elegant, quietly radiant. She held her violin to her chin, then paused. "There's a song I'd like to play," she said to the crowd, "but it doesn't belong to me." She looked toward Nathaniel. It was once a lullaby written by a woman who saw the world as it should be, even when it wasn't. She wrote it for someone she loved, but she never got to finish it. Her silence became the seed of something bigger than any of us. She turned back to the audience. "And tonight, I'd like to offer it not as a performance, but as a thank you to every soul who's ever played in the dark." Then she lifted her bow and began. The melody was familiar now, but she had changed it again. It had grown. It opened with the original refrain, slow and aching like breath after a long cry. But then it blossomed into a new variation, a passage filled with hope, woven from every student's voice, every memory, every moment that had shaped the hall since it was reborn. Nathaniel stepped forward then. He hadn't planned to, but his hands moved without asking permission. He sat at the grand piano and joined her, not to lead, but to listen with her through her beside her. The two of them played as if they had always known each other in some other lifetime, as if the music had always been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. It soared, it softened, it stilled, and then silence, not empty, full. The audience remained hushed for a heartbeat longer than expected. No one moved. Some people wept. Others just stared, hands clasped tightly together as if afraid to let go of what they'd just witnessed. Then the applause came, not explosive, but resounding, not for fame, not for talent, for truth. After the performance, while the crowd filtered out into the snow-lit streets, Nathaniel stayed behind in the empty hall. The chairs were askew programs scattered on the floor, and the piano bench still warm from his hands. He ran his fingers along the keys once more, then looked toward Lily's portrait. "I kept the promise," he whispered. and in the stillness that followed, he could almost hear her laugh. Amelia entered quietly, holding a folded note. "Someone left this for you," she said. He opened it. "I missed the recital, but I saw it streamed. I don't have much to give, but I'm coming by tomorrow to offer piano lessons for free. My daughter wants to play like the girl with the silver thread dress. Thank you for giving us a place to belong." He folded it gently, then placed it beside Lily's journal in the office drawer. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, certain, unbothered by time. And inside, Royce Hall music waited patiently, knowing tomorrow it would live again. Not because of perfection, but because someone would open the door, sit at the piano, and begin. Just one note, just one breath, just one hand, reaching into the silence and finding someone waiting on the other side. And that would always be enough. Sometimes the most powerful songs aren't the ones we hear, but the ones we remember, the ones that rise from grief, silence, and healing. In this story, a broken piano, a grieving billionaire, and a fearless young violinist showed us that music is not about applause, it's about connection. Nathaniel Royce lost everything when his wife passed, including his reason to play. But it took one brave performance at a forgotten train station and one teenage girl bold enough to believe to reignite a flame the world had thought extinguished. Together they didn't just revive a melody, they resurrected a movement. The true lesson: we're all carrying a song inside us. Sometimes all it takes is a place to be heard, and someone to believe we still matter. Whether you're the one playing or the one listening your story, your silence, your second chance, it all matters. Because when we dare to play our truth, no matter how broken the keys, someone somewhere begins to heal. So play, speak, begin.